Okay,
Music
good.
earlier.
You're good now? Yeah, awesome. Perfect. Yeah, I don't know. There's some technical issues with the phone, laptop, combination two thing. So I tried to do this separate way because I was getting feedback on the mic at the last meeting. So I'm hoping that maybe this will fix it. So let's go ahead and jump in real quick. If you're good to go, and tell us a little bit about, we already kind of know a lot about you. I say Bronson Church a little bit more less known, especially church. So like I, diving in deep, but I would say West Point, that things like that are definitely important to highlight. And again, military background. So I'd love to hear a little bit about your military career and et cetera, just a kind of little bio, and then we'll go into some questions.
Well, thanks, Phil. Appreciate it. Yeah, my first opportunity to finally make it to Alaska was 2003, and that was after West Point. Fortunately, my grades were good enough to get my first assignment out of the academy. So I spent some time in Missouri doing some officer basic training, and then came up here for Fort Richardson, which then became J Bear while I was there. So that was from 2003 on to 2009. A little bit after that, I switched to the reserve, also on J Bear. After that, I spent a couple years doing military and veterans affairs work for Department of Emergency Management, also on J Bear. And then that took me to my first run for the State House in 2016. And I served 4 terms in the House of Representatives. During the military, I was a military police officer, captain, and my deployment to Afghanistan was from Fort Rich. Spent a year there as a lieutenant, and got. I would say that the better part of Afghanistan was 2005 and 2006 when I spent my time there. My little brother, was there 3 different deployments with the Marine Corps, and that was a little bit more rough. He saw a whole lot more action and combat than we had to, fortunately. But my time in the military was all on the law enforcement and military police side of things. One of my last assignments before I got out was Washington, D.C., when just before the presidential election, they got together about 700 military personnel to take charge of all of the military ceremonies and events dealing with the inauguration. The military parade, all those events are generally run by the military, even though it's civilians that are usually the participants. So that was a 7-month assignment for me. And once the president was inaugurated, and George Bush had left office and Barack Obama had taken over, that was the time my active duty service ended. So I was glad to get back here to Alaska and have enjoyed being in Alaska for many years now. We have 6 kids, all born here in Wasilla, and it has been um, well worth it. It was a lot of years getting up to Alaska, and
Give us
well,
a highlight, and I would love to see that. I want to dive a little deeper because, like, I think that's kind of the difference between um, what I like to do in the technical side of stuff, and just like Dave Bronson mentioned in our meeting, is like, I don't want to get into technical. It's like, I live in technicals. That's what I want. So what was West Point like? And I just kind of consider it because, like, there's not many people I've ever met. I mean, I went to Annapolis. My high school girlfriend's brother went to Annapolis, so I got to go to Annapolis and do like a tour. It was coolest place in the world, super cool. So I've never been to West Point. Tell me a little bit about it, and tell me, like, how'd you get there? I assume you were in JROTC or something like that. You obviously had to do really good grades, et cetera, to get to West Point. So tell me a little bit about that background.
yeah, well, I loved American history growing up. Homeschool, I got to take American history every year, pretty much, which suited me just fine. And it's how I found out that the nation's military academy was actually in New York, of all places. a fort that George Washington used to command during the American Revolution, and actually the same military base that Benedict Arnold tried to give to the British. Unfortunately for us, he was caught as a spy, and that didn't happen. But the military base is still there, along with a lot of the redoubts and remains, the giant chain crossing the Hudson River, all that from the American Revolution is still very much alive and present for everyone that goes through West Point. When I went, it was the end of the Clinton administration, and then the beginning of the Bush administration. It was a time of transition. It was before DEI was popular and starting to affect the military, but you could kind of see that it was coming, and so we were there when they were kind of trying to get rid of Shakespeare and put in a whole bunch of less academic worthy stuff. And then we were there when they kind of reversed that, and the commandant said, "No, I think we're going to go back to Shakespeare." So just an interesting time to be a college student at a college that wasn't really a college. It was more military than college, and it was a great 4 years. We had a chance to be there during, before, and after 9/11, which was only about an hour down the road, New York City. And I had one of my classmates, went AWOL and was down there, helping search for bodies on 9/11, and it was very real. One of my classmates and I, watched the buildings come down together from my dorm room. We don't call them dorms, but I translate for civilian speak. And she had already decided. They make you decide 2 years into your West Point experience whether or not you're gonna stick it out and be in the military and do your 10 years total, or in this case 12. And she had decided that civilian life was where she wanted to be, but it takes you a few months to get out of the military. So she was still going through that process, and we were just sitting across from each other watching the Twin Towers, on the screen, and we were going very very different places. I was expecting to end up in Afghanistan or Iraq, and she was not even going to be in the military. But it was just a great experience. Highly recommend it. Of course, I think the military is doing a lot better now than it was 4 years ago. 4 years ago, I would not have been recommending the military to anybody. But yeah, the service academy is a very unique experience.
It sounds like it. Being like, I don't know what that would have been. I did go to 9/11. I mean, I went to the Twin Towers before. My dad was from New York originally, so I had been to the Twin Towers, and I got to go up to them, stand right next to them, look up at them, and like touch the glass and stuff. It was really cool. And then I came literally like a month. It was like a couple weeks after 9/11 happened. I got to see. I bought some of the merchandise and stuff they were selling on next, right, literally right next to the fence of the 9/11 stuff. So it was a really insane experience. So I can't imagine having to watch that, especially being in the military and knowing what that means for you as a person going forward. Looking back, I can't imagine. I know a lot of people, um, were psychologically changed, from that experience, for the rest of their lives, from either physical injury or from, just mental issues that they had from things that they've seen when they're in the military over there. But going into a little more detail, like your experience as an EMT, firefighter, Army MP captain, what is, like, just because like we all know about David Eastman as legislature, we know that, and so we're very familiar with that. We'll dive into a little more into those things, but I really want to dig into the history and what kind of created the foundation for why you are a better legislator and why you make the decisions you do. So, like I said, for instance, you had a perfect attendance record from 2017 to 2025. That type of thing is most likely instilled from your military background and et cetera, history. So, kind of understand you as a person more so than just as a legislator, because like you being attacked for years has been like kind of the mode of operation for the left progressives and even the GOP itself. So we'll get there. But going back, your Army MP captain experience, firefighter, or EMT, Eagle Scout background. Like, why does that set you up for being a perfect attendance record for like almost a decade?
Yeah, well, that's certainly not the norm in Juneau for sure. There was one Democrat legislator who also, was known for voting on every bill, up until I guess about halfway through my time, and then he drifted off. When I talked to him, he said, he made sure to be there for every vote because he knew as soon as he started slacking off, it was gonna go sideways on him, and he wanted to just do that, personally. So I had a lot of respect for him. Uh, in my case, I felt a call to be on the front lines from a very early age. You end up going to a place like West Point because you want to do some good in the world and you want to learn about military leadership or just leadership in general, and you want to be an active, participant in the American experiment. um, like I said, we got to learn an awful lot about that, and our nation's history growing up, and the Constitution, the Declaration of Independence, and how that all came together, and the cost that was paid and continues to be paid, so that that can continue to be the American experience. And that meant being willing to put myself forward and in one sense physically being willing to be shot at. But I think on the political side, it's not the physical shooting at usually, though Charlie Kirk was a friend. And I'm you know my kids were at least as shook up about that when that happened last September as I was, because they knew he was a friend of mine, and they knew that I'm standing on the front lines, and in some cases trying to face off against some of the very same types of people that um, have publicly said they like what happened, and they hope that it happens to other conservative leaders. It ends up being a very short list of people in politics, particularly on the conservative side, who are willing to go toe to toe with the left, and that makes you a target. Politically, legally. Certainly they've come after us legally, and we've gotten physical threats and those sorts of things.
Yeah, tell us a little bit about that legal situation. Like, so there was a resolution with that, obviously. Did you ultimately get? Did you were you able to? What came out of that?
So that started. I think it was less than 3 months into my first year in the legislature, and has gone all the 8 years that I was in office. So I don't even remember how many different legal uh, attacks they've tried to target me with. The first one, they wanted to accuse me of divulging confidential information from the ethics committee. Of course, they kind of got ahead of themselves because they accused me of that before I was actually on the ethics committee. So I didn't have any confidential information, but that wasn't really something that they cared about. So they decided to kick me off of the ethics committee, and tried to do it before we even had our very first committee meeting. But it it is part and parcel with the corruption that is very much common practice, business as usual in Juneau. And honestly, it's very rare for a conservative to be on the ethics committee. The only way that I was on the ethics committee at all was because when I was first elected, it was about 30 seconds after they announced the first results, that we had won our primaries and whatnot, that you had Gabrielle Ledoux and Paul Seaton and Louise Stutes all announced that they were going to go caucus with the Democrats, and that had not happened before. Of course, it's part and parcel every year it happens nowadays, but that was the first time in 2016. So we went from hooray, we just got elected, to 30 seconds later, okay, Republicans aren't in charge of anything anymore, and all the Republican legislators that were being reelected were losing their staff and losing their committee assignments and losing their chairmanships, and a lot of them just threw up their hands and said, hey, I give up. Basically, I'm going to go fishing. There's one, the one senator that was standing next to me when that news was announced down at the Captain Cook Hotel on election night. Basically said, hey, don't worry about it, David. I was in the minority in the Senate, and I just get a boat and you go fishing, and it's fun being in the minority. You got nothing to do. Um, that was not my approach, honestly. That is common enough in junior today on the Republican side. It's like, hey, if we're not in charge of everything, then we don't have any work to do. We'll just wait until somebody puts us in charge, and then we'll work hard. But we don't really have any work to do before. Of course, that is not the Democrat approach to politics. There are years when Democrats are in the minority, and when they're in the minority, they seem to work awful hard, and they find a way to get a lot of the things that they're trying to accomplish accomplished. And they forgot to get the memo that when you're in the minority, you can't do anything, you can't get anything done. So I didn't you know pause or anything like that when I first got elected, and no one else was putting in for the Republican seat on the ethics committee. So I said, sure. I did that for 4 years at West Point. I was on the West Point Ethics Honor Committee, and attended trials and was on jury trials, all that kind of stuff with their ethics program. So I said I'll do it, and so I kind of got in by accident because no one else wanted it. But then as soon as they realized that I was actually conservative, and ethics was something I did care about, then they went right to work trying to kick me off. And so that was the first legal attack. And there's been more than half a dozen different attacks. We've won, basically all of them. Of course, every time you win a court case against you when it's political, they find a way to make you pay for it anyway. So, yeah, we won, and we were proved innocent, as the case may be. But every single time, they find a way to say, all right, you're still paying all the legal fees, David, because uh, whatever the justification is there. And the kicker is, of course, once you have, for us, it was over $300,000 in legal fees for all those cases. And then they tell you, oh, by the way, since you're a legislator, we've got a new interpretation of the ethics rules for legislators, and that means you can't actually go and fundraise to pay off those legal fees unless you find a whole bunch of people to give really small donations. So if you get over 1,000 people to come in and each give $250, well then you can get your 250 $300,000 legal fees paid off, but not unless you do that, or you come back and get your $250 every year for however many years until it gets paid off. So yeah, so my wife and I had to take out a second mortgage just to pay for all the court cases that we won.
Yikes! Yeah, and that's the crazy thing. You won the case, and yet you had to take out a mortgage to second mortgage in your home too. And I hit home for someone that was a mortgage lender for a number of years. It's like the last kind of situation you ever want to be in. And the worst case scenario is that you didn't lose. You actually came out on top. I was also in this position, hundreds of thousands of dollars in legal fees, and I sued because I believe that their case was crap, and it was proven to be crap because we won unanimously in Superior and Supreme Court. Sued them, and we were capped. I mean, granted, Alaska is one of very few states where you can even sue for court costs for this type of thing, unless I can prove nefarious intent. So it's nice that they at least offer it, but 50K, 60K was about the max I was going to be able to get. I got 50, and I should have, and the costs were over 200. So like that was just that case. That wasn't even the APOC stuff. So like very expensive, and people don't understand that it literally like transforms your entire life when these type of attacks take place, and that's why it's so important for people to support people like you that are willing to take on those sacrifices. So with that, look at the uncompromising stance while you were in legislature. Why were you willing to vote the way you were, regardless of the obvious impacts from that? type of stance.
Well, in one sense, that some of the attacks weren't necessarily even about me. I mean, of course, I personally, I'd like to think that they were about me to some extent, but more so, it was about everyone else and making an example out of a legislator, whether that was me or Tammy Wilson. They also tried to do that, or Laura Reinbold, and they used the ethics committee to go after all three of us for really bogus things. I mean, they had like a 3-year investigation. This was one of the cases um, that was going on when I was on the ethics committee for a few months before they were able to uh, pretend that I had violated the law, and they were going after her for 3 years for using like basically her office zip code on a postcard that she paid for to invite her constituents to go to a public meeting that was being hosted on oil and gas. I mean, just really stupid things. Your tax dollars at work. But as I was watching that, and even before I joined the legislature, I mean, I knew a little bit about what I was getting into. I knew that conservative, things don't come out of the Alaska legislature. Um, conservative rhetoric comes out of the Alaska legislature at times, but actual policy decisions don't. We repealed SB 91, and that was a 3-year, knockdown, drag out fight for some of us, and we were able to repeal it. And you could say, I guess that was conservative. Basically, we just tried to undo implementing critical race theory on Alaska's criminal justice system with the catch and release, criminal justice reforms, where you had, I've got one, trooper's dad was calling me saying, "Hey, my son just arrested the same guy stealing two different cars in 12 hours. And, he arrested him twice because of catch and release." This is the kind of thing we were dealing with. But so many of the decisions that you make as a legislature, certainly in my experience, my 8 years, um, were not hard choices. I mean, a handful of them, all right, were hard choices, but most of the time it's pretty easy to figure out what the right, way to vote is and what the wrong way to vote is. And of course, they stack up all the personal benefits on the wrong side. Oh, hey, there's all sorts of benefits to come over here and vote against your constituents. Sometimes, they'll threaten you if vote against the caucus. Like, well, hey, I'm just voting for my constituents. Like, yeah, well, we don't care about that. We're gonna punish you for voting with your constituents, for voting to keep your campaign promises. That is the status quo in Juneau right now, unfortunately. Um, and so showing up and just being there every time was part of my commitment. It wasn't about an attendance record. Honestly, it was about the fact that if I didn't show up, just my not showing up, they were going to do something that was going to be, negative against my constituents. And it wasn't, me just saying that. I mean, there's times where literally they would wait until my car pulled out of the parking lot, and I would, try to go home for dinner with the family, which is only about 5 minutes away from the Capitol building. And my staff would call me, 2 minutes into my 5 minute drive and say, "Hey, they saw that you left, and now they're getting together to do a vote," which they're not supposed to do, but they do that kind of thing. And so I'd have to, hit the gas and pop back into my seat, and I'd run back into my seat, and I kid you not, less than 5 minutes from the time I left and the time I get back, and they've got 70 people in the House chambers, all the legislators, the leadership, the staffers, all that sort of stuff. And I walk in, and the speaker, scowls at me, and then he just gavels out and says, "Hey, whatever we were about to do, David's here, so we're not going to do it." And so that was my role for my 8 years in the legislature. There was no one else in the House that.
That's really cool. I mean, that's one way to stop them. I mean, like, and, for me, I do that too, like in my own way. But I'm not in the legislature, but I definitely try to slow them down or stop them in any way I can. And I think that one of the biggest ways we can do that is by electing people like yourself to office. I'd like to cover a little bit about what happened You don't have to go into super detail. I mean, you're welcome to talk about as much as you want about your opponent. It's not like Bronson where he has like 30 opponents. It's going to take up the entire time. You're welcome to talk about your opponent and how you differ from them in this call. No problem whatsoever. We've kind of covered your history. You're welcome to pitch your campaign as well. But I really like to know a little bit about what happened during what, because we spoke for the first time after the election in 2024. Prior to that, we met at the. I was waving sign for Palin when I was working for her campaign, and you were running for House successfully in 2022. And so the next time we spoke was 2000 end of closer to the end of 2024, after the AKGOP, the Alaska Republican Party, essentially stabbed you in the back after your successful primary in 2024. So I love to hear about that experience. Specifically knowing that I have extensive experience with Republican Party groups across the country, and no other Republican Party would have done that in that circumstance. So, very
Right.
interesting thing to point out, and something you obviously, I mean, you would know that I wouldn't say that if it weren't true, but I could tell you. When I bring this scenario, I've made graphics of this scenario with you specifically as an example of why ranked choice voting is so damaging, even on the Republican side of the table. It's not just damaging on the Democrat side; it's very potentially damaging. I call it incumbent protection. It's also, Lisa Murkowski political party protection, which is, in my opinion, the Alaska Republican Party. So, tell me about your experience with that, specifically winning your primary in 2024. Successfully, and then having your Republican Party, who you are the most conservative legislator in the country, in the state, them essentially donating to your opponent who lost in the primary. This just seems really, really amazing, and it just seems very surreal as a person in in your point of view.
Yeah. Yeah, there's a lot there to unpack. I'll try and hit some of the highlights. So one of the first is to recognize that there's a lot of messaging, to put it kindly, that goes on to describe the Republican Party as a force for good, or trying to implement the Republican Party platform, or try to be conservative, or restrain government, or those sorts of things. Well, to whatever extent that's true in other states, it is not true in Alaska. Certainly in the 20 plus years that I've been involved in Republican Party politics, and I came into the legislature a very different way than most Republican legislators do, because I was involved in local Republican politics, at the district level, starting back in 2007. So, it was 10 years of experience on that side of it without doing anything with the legislature before I ran for office for the House. And so I had, again, a decent idea of how bad it was, but before I got into it. But the Republican Party in Alaska is both similar and different to other states. I think one of the things we talked about in the past was you had 15, 16 different states that were running ranked choice voting issues in their elections, in the same cycle 2 years ago. And of those, the state GOP came out against it and fought against it in every state except for Alaska, and they were successful. It's not terribly popular when you get right down to it. So the GOP was very successful in either preventing it from happening, or repealing it, or what have you. Alaska, not so much. The GOP was mostly silent. State leadership for the GOP came out with this total BS, legal memo saying that, their attorney said, it's hard for the party to be involved in ballot measures, so they can't really say much. I mean, just total, made up BS. But they used that to justify really not putting much effort, maybe some lip service. They raised some money and didn't really spend it to help you. I mean, as you know, we're going over ground that your listeners probably are already well familiar with. Um, but to the extent that the GOP decides they're going to get involved and fight those things, they're usually successful. Our party hasn't. Now, it was also interesting that the Republicans had, some control of leadership in the House 2 years ago, and they made a tactical decision that they were not going to focus on some of those very close, Republican Democrat seats in the House, and they were going to focus their attention and their money and their efforts and their airtime on talk radio on my race, which was one Republican versus another Republican, which wasn't going to impact, whether a Republican majority gets elected in the House. And so in that sense, they made a conscious, calculated decision that it was worth it to, even if you lose the House to the Democrats, it was worth it if you get rid of, somebody like David Eastman. And that's a very challenging thing for a lot of Republican voters to understand and get their arms around. Like, how does that even make sense? Um, I'll give you an example that has nothing to do with Alaska, because it is not completely an Alaska phenomenon. But I had two friends that were in the state house in Texas, back 2010 timeframe, and you can go online and read a little bit about this. But uh, the Texas State House has 150 seats, and the Republicans at that time had about 100 of those seats, which would be a two-thirds majority. Now, if you have a two-thirds majority in a legislature, a lot of really cool things happen. Basically, you can take the hard votes, and if the Republicans, stick together, you can just pass things, and the Democrats can't really do a lot to stop you because that's the benefit of being a supermajority. Um, Now they were at the perfect part of those 150 seats. They were at 98, and 98 is exactly where Republican leadership wanted to be in Texas, because you have almost two-thirds, and it's great because you've got, the committee assignments and the staff and control over the finances, and you've got almost 2-to-1 against the Democrats, but you don't have two-thirds, so you can always blame the Democrats, because whenever your policies that you're supposed to be fighting for fail, you could say, oh well, we didn't have two-thirds, the Democrats, so forth and so on. Now that was going great up until the election happened. 98 Republicans got elected, so they say perfect, and then two Democrats switched to become Republicans after the election. And so now suddenly they have a two-thirds supermajority in the House, and I kid you not, the very first thing that happened was Republican leadership got an emergency meeting together, and the topic of their meeting was, how do we lose two seats?
It
Because
honestly doesn't surprise me. It's like and now, because I've been involved with politics. I mean, the more but I'll tell you from a perspective of, like, I was a banker, a young banker, like the early 20s. And so my only experience with politics was like, me, Treadwell was a client. Like, so he came to the bank and I helped him when he left lieutenant governorship. I didn't really vote very much up until I was like, I think probably my mid 20s ish, I would say. And I was like fully committed to my career at the bank. I was like just fully. And then, like, when I left the bank, I was a consultant and I had to do things on my own and run my own business. That's when I got really focused on like politics and like understanding what the hell was going on. And I reached out to people like yourself at that time, and only a handful of people, reached back out. And I realized, man, this system's super broken, and so, like, you've always been very approachable. So, like, is that part of like your communication strategy for your constituents? Go, like, it seems like that's always been your kind of mode of operation. And I don't think very many other legislators are like that. So, like, can you tell me a little bit about why are like that, and what's your motivation to being like that? Because it seems like it's kind of exhausting. For me, it's pretty. I mean, I've been doing it since 2022, just around ranked choice voting. So not around anything else, not around representation, around, people calling me, asking me questions, etc. Just ranked choice voting, and that's already a lot. And so I'd like to know, like, why are you so accessible?
Yeah, fair question, and I don't get that question a lot, but here's how I would, approach that. So I do not need to be in the legislature. My I don't have come from a political family. I was the first member of my extended family to run for office. Um, no one else has since I did that. So I'm not part of a dynasty. I'm not starting a dynasty, and my life will continue just fine. If and when I'm not involved in politics anymore, and certainly now that I'm not elected, and my life is continuing just fine there. So I personally don't think of being in the legislature as my dream job. And you know, in as much as everyone in the House wants to be in the Senate, everyone in the Senate wants to be governor. That's not me. When my senator resigned, he thought at the time that I should take the spot, or that I would regardless, because I was kind of the first name on the list for that. That was not where I wanted to go. I never put in to replace Mike Dunleavy when he retired to run for the Senate. Um, I was involved in the process. I just didn't, put my name forward. And, who knows? Did Bill Walker, want to appoint a David Eastman? Probably not. So that's always a factor. But all that to say, politics is, in as much as it is my life, it's my professional life out of a sense of duty and obligation, because no one else is doing what really needs to be done. And I would be glad to support someone else to stand up and do that in my seat, or in any other seat, frankly, because a lot of the work in the legislature can be done by a small group of people, and they don't have to be from Wasilla. They can be from any other part of the state, and do the same job. You know, uh, Basic things like ensuring that there's some minimal transparency between the voters and the public, and the legislative process. So often the legislature is used to being sequestered in Juneau, and they're used to the public not being able to find out what's going on until after the decision is made, after the vote's already been taken, that kind of thing. And frankly, there's a lot of people that like it that way, and they'll have votes that are legally binding, that you never find out who voted which way when it comes to things like appointments to the legislature. There's a statute that says, hey, when the governor makes an appointment to the legislature, your legislator has to have a legally binding vote on whether or not to confirm them. And if you can imagine the next Trump appointee to the Supreme Court going through the confirmation process, and then not knowing how the Senate voted, they're just going to tell you, oh well, he passed, or she failed because she didn't get enough votes. That's literally what they try to do here in Alaska when it comes to confirming new legislators. And I was
This space was downloaded via spacesdown.com. Visit to download your spaces today.
the only legislator that said this is not only against the law, but that's against every principle of transparency and public accountability and public process. Um, and so it fell to me to be the one to say, hey, no, let's actually, put our votes on the record. And so that's been just one of many, many fights, over my 8 years in the legislature. Again, anyone can take that stand. It's not it's nothing about me personally or about my district personally, but very few legislators do. And in fact, I didn't come across any legislators that took that stand when I was, fighting those fights. Uh, so I mean it's not about me personally. It's just about the public process. And
So why are you coming back in 2026? You like they chased you out of town. They tried to tar and feather you the entire time you were in office. They like made you very uncomfortable. So much so to other people that I know that I helped get elected, that you're aware of, that I helped get elected across the state, are no longer in office now, including Senator Holland. And so he got chased out. He was very excited about joining Juneau and going down there. And actually, I believed he was a smart. I believe he had a good head on his shoulders, and he had a good way of navigating things. And I was completely wrong. And so, like, you got to be kind of tough to handle it down there. And so, like, I wouldn't do it. personally, I do appreciate the fact that you point out that other people, there's no one else doing it, and that's true. And so again, are there any other people in particular? I know that one of the key things that you wanted to do with your campaign is to bring other people into the legislature with you, so that way your job's a little easier. Is there people that are currently running that you'd support, and so that way we can highlight them? Because like I said, I'm gonna take this recording, put it on various socials, and so I just want to make sure people are aware that you're supportive of other campaigns if you'd like to point those out. Otherwise, what do you think is going to happen in 2026 in your comeback? We'll say you get elected. Let's say we move forward, and you're down in Juneau, and we'll go looking from a perspective of we don't have assistance, like weren't successful getting the people that you needed elected. What are you going to do then?
Yeah. So one of the best parts about my job as a legislator has been, and it, it's not something I can count because it's happened many times, but each time is precious. When someone will come up to me and say, or call me on the phone and say, thank you for speaking up and being a voice for us because no one else is, and on just common sense, types of things. Um, they really, really censor, or convince people to self censor in the legislature on conservative issues, or even just, general ethical, moral issues, dealing with corruption, that kind of thing. And so you end up with a majority of Alaskans say, "Hey, this is a no-brainer." Like, whether it's follow the PFD law, or whether it's follow the law that the legislature has to keep their sessions to 90 days, or any number of other things. Follow the law that where the Constitution says that the legislature has to vote to adopt their own rules, and that's a constitutional requirement that the legislature willfully violates every single year. And so we would raise that issue because it's kind of an important issue when you dig into it. And so when people would come and say, "Hey, thank you for being that voice," and no one else is speaking up for me on this issue that I care about, and you are, and they weren't even necessarily from my district or from wherever part of Alaska, and that's what brings me back to being willing and
And that should be
otherwise willing
highlighted
to run.
too. It should be highlighted also is like your stance on abortion. If you were in Idaho, you'd be like one of the most celebrated legislators in the whole state of Idaho. And like I had a friend, of a guy who runs in Colorado. He's run perpetually because he's trying to break through. And I told him, it's like if you lived anywhere else, you would not be having struggles. You would already been elected a long time ago.
Right.
And so like you'd be still in office down, wherever, if you lived in a different state. So like how does that affect you, knowing one against you got the Republican Party that's completely against you, doesn't play, doesn't help you, and actively fundraising against you to get a candidate that's not nearly as conservative or Republican as you are. And then on top of that, you knowing that the legislature you're actively working with also doesn't want to work with you. But I would love to hear about your stance on abortion, because I know that's
Sure.
a major deal for you and something you've been very passionate about. So, and Idaho is currently facing a abortion bill, currently, and to get abortion in Idaho, and they're fighting that diligently. I believe it's financed by the same group of people that are pushing all these other very progressive ideology pushes in these conservative West states. So tell me a little bit
Right.
about your fight against on this abortion front, because my assumption is that a lot of these massive targeted attacks against you are coming from these well organized, well financed fronts like Matnuska Health Foundation or Planned Parenthood or some other organization that obviously wants abortions in Alaska. That's my assumption. I'm the only one saying this. This is my opinion. But knowing how these organizations operate and these NGOs operate, it wouldn't surprise me.
Yeah, no. My experience is that that's not at all the case. And of course, I could be wrong because I don't know everything. But what I do know is that abortion's a great example. Even if you don't necessarily care about abortion personally, it's a great example because it's so extreme. It's a very extreme example, and sometimes the extreme examples really help you to see through the clouds and the fog and all the propaganda that surrounds politics. So when I first got to the legislature, I was pro-life. Always have been. When I was growing up, my dad was the president of the board of Southern California Right to Life. That kind of thing. So that was just part of conservative Republican politics for me growing up, and it's always been the case. And I do believe that we have a duty of care to every patient, including our unborn patients. I mean, it's as an EMT, you want to save the unborn child, and you want to save the mom, and you don't have to choose between the two. Usually, you get to try and save both. And legislatively, I think we have that same obligation. But regardless, uh, abortion in Republican politics is like the cash cow of Republican politics. Now, for a few years, it was repealing Obamacare. Um, and Republicans, there were so many Republicans across the country that got elected on, we need to repeal Obamacare. And it was the best thing in town for Republican, strategists, political campaigners and campaign strategists, that kind of thing, because it's a very popular issue. Democrats were really bad on it. You say, I'm a Republican, I want to repeal Obamacare. You automatically got, some number of votes and maybe enough to get elected. Maybe add that to some other issues and you get yourself elected. Um, Now, to the point where the worst thing that Republican strategists wanted to see happen was Obamacare actually get repealed, because then now you've lost your best winning issue as far as getting elected. And for so many years, abortion politics in the Republican Party has functioned like that, with a segment of voters, not all Republican voters, of course, but there's been a segment of voters that have been very consistent in, you say you're pro-life and you want to, save babies, and, vote for me, and they will. And they'll vote for you, and they'll, give you money or campaign donations, whatever it is. And that has been so true, since Roe versus Wade in, 1976. And the Republican Party has consistently failed to deliver on that issue, and obviously not just that issue. They failed to deliver on lots of issues. And the reason I'm even talking about this is because the Republican Party in Juneau consistently fails to deliver on Republican issues, and basically all Republican issues, if you get right down to it. But it's really easy to see on the abortion issue, because the rhetoric is one thing and the voting record is the opposite. And so you say, hey, come campaign time, we're a pro-life party. Here's our platform. It says, life at conception until natural end of death. So we're against euthanasia too. And anyways, that's the Republican Party platform. But that is not typically how Republicans will vote when you get down to Juneau, because in Republican, wisdom in Juneau, abortion's a lost cause.
Were there like lobbyists though, like coming into the Capitol talking to people? Did you like like was that common? Like, so like one of the things I think about, I've not been to the Capitol. I've been to I've been outside the building, never been inside. And now with the metal detectors and other stuff, I have no interest. But the point is like, whenever you are there as a legislator, do you have people like lobbying you, like coming into your office trying to get, like, maybe not you, but is that common with like the other organizations that are encouraging abortion, that want to see abortion in Alaska, maybe even people
No, I
from
mean,
out of state?
honestly, it's so much a lost cause in Republican politics that it's not even talked about. Like, you don't get pro-life lobbyists coming to Juneau. I mean, if Alaska Rights Life came to Juneau one day out of a whole year, that would be something. But that would be the max, and they would be the only group that's coming talking to you about something against abortion. Whereas on the other side of it, you will have Planned Parenthood who will literally come into your committee hearing, and you can go pull up the videos. They're on AKLEDGE or KTOO, where they come into the committee hearing and they say, "Hey, we're Planned Parenthood, or I'm the lobbyist for Planned Parenthood, and you need to vote against the governor's appointee for Attorney General. And why do you need to vote no? Because he was an attorney in a case against us on abortion. End of story. Like you should not vote to confirm the governor's appointee because he took a case in which he was against us on abortion, and that is no joke. That's the mentality. Because Planned Parenthood, runs the roost on abortion issues and frankly other issues as well in Juneau and in the Capitol. And remember, the precinct that the Capitol building is voted 5-1 for Hillary over Donald Trump. I mean, this is not a neutral territory. This is very far left territory, and the Capitol building reflects that. It doesn't have to, but it does, because all of the lobbyists will be on one side, and you won't have there's no pro-family lobbyists in the Capitol building. There just isn't. Um, there's no anti-abortion lobbyists. There's no girls in sports lobbyists. To the extent that there's any lobbying going on, it's not because there's a lobbyist in Juneau. So Republicans know that, Democrats know that. Republicans and Democrats both know that there's no appetite, as they would say, for doing any kind of cutting of abortion funding or anything like that. But there is to the public. I mean, a majority of Alaskans hold the position that I don't want to pay for your abortion. Even if I like abortion, I don't want to
I
pay
mean,
for yours.
even then, I would say I wasn't necessarily pro-abortion, any stance in my life, but I was like, I understood the idea of a woman's right to choose, or like I don't want to be a part of the conversation. But now that I a little older, like one, that I don't want to pay for it. I think it's insane. And then two, especially paying for illegals or other people having, it's just like more insanity. And then, like, on top of it, I believe that, after COVID, there's some major questions about what exactly they're up to and what they're doing with the body parts of these babies and other things. And it
Sure.
makes me very, very, I question everything when it comes to medical and science in general now, because they ultimately require us to, because they're lying to us in a lot of capacities.
That's fair.
So I didn't used to be this way. My wife and I are both very much more health conscious about our food choices nowadays too, and eating at home and doing better ingredients, etc. These things are choices that we're making because we can't trust the media, we can't trust the social media, we can't trust the companies that are making the food, etc. So when you get down to Juneau, what are you going to do for people like me that want to stay in Alaska? Just like I said earlier with Bronson, is like, I'm a 36-year-old person. I got multiple businesses. I'd love to maintain them and run them, expand them in Alaska. And there's a lot of, I met a guy literally yesterday trading a snow machine for an excursion. Really cool trade, cool guy. Him and I are going to go snow machining. Young guy running his own business. Again, what are you going to do for us, or how are you going to help us like get where we need to go? Because that's really what matters, in my opinion. And I don't mean to be selfish, but I am a little bit, because like I don't want to leave Alaska, and I really want people to recognize that people like me that will be employers here in the next 5 or 10 years, and may potentially employ a large percentage of young people, especially in the technical fields, that are not oil and gas, that are not already established industries, may not stay because the legislature doesn't care about us, because the governor doesn't care about us, because the laws aren't structured in a way that actually are done in a way that make it where I can actually open a business and run a business. So, what exactly are you going to do for me? I'm just curious.
Yeah, yeah. So let me try and tie a couple of things together, because you had also asked about my opponent and how she figures into all
Yeah,
this.
I think it's totally fair. Like I said, in Bronson's case, I trying to isolate that because it's so wide. The field is so wide. It's really it'd take forever to kind of go through each one of those people, and I don't really want to highlight people, and stuff like that. So, but for you, it does matter, and it's kind of pointed because the person has a. I wouldn't. I don't know their voting record exactly, but from what I understand, it's not as good as your voting record, and so you can go into more detail if you'd
Well,
like.
yeah, if you're a conservative voter, you and you were in my district, you had the legislator with the best voting record, in the valley, and most days, most the rest of the state as well. But certainly the best voting record in the Valley, and now my legislator has the worst voting record of any of the Matsu Valley, delegates, and so there's 6 House reps, there's 3 senators, and she has the worst out of the 9, and that's because she votes on things like uh, banning styrofoam, food containers with Democrats. I mean, Democrat bill, and the Democrats want to, ban straws, and they want to ban plastic, and they want to ban, this year it was ban styrofoam. And she was one of the 2 Valley, reps that voted with the Democrats on that. And the governor fortunately vetoed it. Otherwise, we now be dealing with a state ban on styrofoam containers. And that's the difference. I mean, yes, my voting record was more consistent than others, and so if you look state to state, you'll find that mine was, some years was listed as the most consistent conservative voting record of anyone in the country. And that's something that I focused a lot of time and effort on to get those votes right, and showed up every time to do it when not everyone else did. But it's not so much about my opponent specifically. Uh, every time that I've run for office, it really hasn't been against an individual. It's been against a machine. It's been against the swamp in Juneau, and so this year they've chosen Jubilee Underwood to be their representative, and you look at where the campaign donations come from and the political help, whatnot. Um, her donors are legislators, legislative staffers, and lobbyists. That's pretty much all of her donors that she's reported so far in the campaign, and that's who I'm running against. The fact that it happens to be her this year is kind of just circumstance. So, yeah, if you look at votes, the House wanted to stand with Canada against Trump on tariffs, and my legislator voted with the Democrats on that too. I mean, she wasn't the only one, but
It's so crazy. It's so crazy. Here's
it,
stuff like that
it
coming out of
is
yeah,
crazy. If you're in
crazy.
another state and you're looking at Republican legislators, you're saying, what's going on in Alaska? And so much of the conversation is usually very intentionally relative. It's like, oh well, we're conservative because of um, you know Tobin or Gray or Begich in the legislature, and aren't they so left? And well, we're better, so we're conservative. It's not conservative, man. It's not even Republican. Like, there was a pastor that came down to Juneau from the Valley, and some of them do on occasion. Maybe it would be good if more of them did. But I remember talking with him after one of our floor sessions, and he was sitting in the gallery just watching. Never been to Juneau before, and didn't know what was what, and he happened to sit behind one of the lobbyists, and the Republican legislator who was carrying the bill that they were debating and voting on that day, kept coming over to the lobbyist saying, "Hey, well, what do I say? What? Tell me what to say about this or the other thing." And the lobbyist would feed him, the talking points, whatnot. And the 2 things that he took away from that was, one, at least that Republican legislator had no idea what he was talking about, which unfortunately is not a rare example. But also, the bill itself was a bill. He said, in the state I came from, no Republican would have been caught dead, voting for that bill. But it's a Republican bill in Alaska, and I mention that because whether it's abortion or some other things, but particularly things like abortion, we are a far left radical state on abortion policy. Unlimited abortions, the state will pay for them. We will fly you out of state to another state to have your abortion. We will, pay for your boyfriend to go with you to that other state, and you'll get per diem and the whole nine. And this is just far out stuff. And like I said, it's not because your average Alaskan says, "Hey, that's a good policy. I support that policy." It happens because Juneau is so far out of accountability or even touch and communication with most Alaskans. And whether that's the capital move or right now in my district, we've got the state trying to give 15,000 acres which used to up until now has been designated basically for the state capital move to Willow that hasn't ever happened. They're gonna give it to some entities, and they're going to put together some industrial parks and data centers and that sort of stuff. And the process is just terrible. I mean, if you want to really piss off the public, you would adopt this kind of process where you say, hey, we have to have this public comment period, but basically we don't care because you're going to get it anyways. And they just shove it down people's throats. And unfortunately, the Republican politicians have basically been given the signal that, hey, you should support this because the governor wants this. So they're all coming down on the side of, yeah, this is a good thing for business or development, which it's not. And honestly, there's not even a lot of information to be able to make the case that it is because it's so not transparent with the public. And so you end up, whether it's on this issue or abortion or frankly most issues, where the public has a role in our political process, and they're supposed to be the ones that consent to the policies and the laws and
Yeah. Well,
whatnot.
it's
And
just like I
Juneau
brought up.
says, no, we don't give a rip. I mean, literally,
Yeah.
the Speaker of
Yeah.
the House went on record publicly and said, we don't care about consent. You're going to get it anyways.
So and then mine's obviously not as extreme, but just a simple example is, I was telling Lieutenant or Church, Joshua Church, about his being lieutenant governor. I went to the Division of Elections as a petitioner, someone that's just this regular citizen. Just, hey, I'm a citizen. I want to do a petition. That's how it's supposed to be done, but
Right.
it's so abnormal. And like a couple things were pointed out to me. One, when I turned my books in, then the guy that said he's never seen this many volunteer, because you got to note if you're volunteer or paid on the back of the book. He said he's never seen this many volunteer books in the entire time he's ever worked for a Division of Election. He's
Right.
worked there for over 20 years. So that's never happened before. Okay, so one. So I'm obviously a brand new guy that's never done anything. That's like at the end of the thing when you find that out. But at the beginning, I'm telling you that, hey, I'm this brand new guy that I don't know what I'm doing. Can you tell me? Like, reach out to APOC. They give me the wrong advice and then turn around and fine me $150,000 for advice that they gave me,
Right.
admitted that they gave me the wrong advice. And then I turn around and go to the Division of Elections and I ask for a petition packet. And the petition packet doesn't have the finance rules related to your reporting requirements because you're doing a petition or a referendum. And I tell them, hey, why don't you take the rules that are related to the finance related to this petition and put it in the petition packet? And they still haven't done it. Like, bro, like you guys, like what's wrong with you? You're like insanely, you're just broken. Like everything's broken. Like the whole damn government's broken. And if people don't recognize that it's broken, then, and that's at the local level. They're all focused on the federal stuff, Iran, all these other things, but they don't realize that like your stupid Division of Elections can't even put a freaking rule packet in a book. Like even after they agree that's a really good idea and that would avoid a lot of problems for citizens like me that don't know anything. But they don't care. They're still going to put it in the book. They still don't care. So it's just a pointing out. It's a very small example that Eastman's Representative Eastman, David Eastman, he's dealt with that at the Juneau level, a much higher level, obviously, but it sprinkles all the way down to the citizen when we're just trying to do something really simple and basic. And so that's kind of the whole point is like, we need to like revamp the whole operation and like redo this, from the core up.
Well,
And
you do, and it's not that you need to go and change the Constitution, because frankly, despite the bad parts of the Constitution, and there are some, you don't actually need to change the Constitution to fix a lot of problems in the legislature. And you do a little bit better to follow it more, consistently. But when you look at how far our public process has come from what it's supposed to be, and I'm not even talking, an ideal like no corruption in politics kind of standard. I'm just talking average corruption. I'm fairly candid with people. Like, one of my goals is to bring Alaska closer to average legislative corruption, because we are so far beyond the pale in so many areas. Like, the show that Republicans sign on to, and I'll pick on Republicans because I am one, and I always have been in Alaskan politics. And if if you just recognize that every vote that the legislature takes on a bill has been pre-scripted, and they literally make you. I think I'm the only legislator that refused to sign the paper. They literally make you tell them ahead of time, if you're going to be voting for their bill before they ever let the vote even get onto the calendar to happen. And so when it does get on the calendar to happen, everybody knows it's going to pass, which is why they all do, and everybody knows that it's going to pass by so many votes or pretty close. And so then they figure out, all right, well, this is a bad bill. I'm committed to helping my other Republican rhino pass this bad bill. But he's got enough votes, so even though I wanted to pass, I get to vote no this time, so that the people back in Wasilla or Big Lake or wherever, I get to vote with them, because isn't it good of me to vote with my constituents, to make them feel better about me? This is how it works. And it is so much like that, more than average, legislatures across the country. So there are so many, there's so much low hanging fruit in Alaska. But the flip side of that is, it is so beyond the pale that it's very I mean, it's a house of cards in one sense. It's very fragile, because they have gone so far away from what they are telling the public is happening, and what the public has asked for, that they feel very vulnerable that they will be exposed. And it only takes one legislator sometimes to just, make mention of the fact that, hey, you guys are violating the Constitution today. How about you not do that? Now, it would help if it was more than just one, and more the merrier. But there is so much room for improvement. And again, like I said, a voter may care nothing about abortion at all. It's the last thing they care about. But you can look at that example just to see how extreme it is from what you think should be happening, what you think Republicans should be doing in the legislature, and what they are doing. Like when I first put my first pro-life bill out, the response I got from my pro-life, Republican legislators was, we can't have a pro-life bill in the legislature. You need to have a pro-life bill that Planned Parenthood is okay with. And that's where the thinking goes. And if they're not okay with it, then you can't put it forward this year. And that's also the level of fight that you see in the Republicans most years. There is none. There's no fight at all. It's managed decline. If you want to, remember one, term, political terminology, that the term to remember is managed decline. That is what Republican legislators are doing in Juneau. They are overseeing, and they want to do it from the highest possible position. They want to be Speaker of the House and President of the Senate and all the rest of it. Managed decline as Alaska becomes blue. And they are very committed to that. And they are so committed that if you step out of line and you start saying, hey, I'm not okay with this managed decline, like, I want to put a stop to this bluing of Alaska, they will literally be threatened by you, to the point where they're going to run against you, even after you're the Republican nominee, even after you win the Republican primary. And they're going to put their time and attention and effort into helping you lose your next election. And in my case, a majority of Republican voters voted for me in a Republican district. The only way my opponent won was, with the help of the money from the GOP. Democrats voted for her. 73% of Democrats who voted for Kamala Harris voted for my opponent. And that was the margin that she needed to win. So, I mean, she was literally elected by Democrat voters.
And ranked choice voting, yeah. And so obviously not a big fan of that. And
Obviously,
so that's
yeah.
yeah. So yes on two, obviously for you, I assume. And I know you've been very supportive of my efforts over the years. So I'm big fan of that. So as we wrap it up, give me a little spiel on like why you should be the best, and then if you have any recommendations on people that they should vote for in other districts nearby that help boost your ability down in Juneau, please don't hesitate to mention them.
Yeah. Well, the message, and I've said this before, but it is very true. The message from Republicans, when they talk to each other in the legislature, is often some version of if you can't beat them, join them. And they've been convinced, whether before or during their time in the legislature, that there is no way to beat the left. There's no way to beat the special interests, which are largely left Democrat, special interests. And so the best we can hope for is just to, basically, ride the wave as Alaska crashes, and becomes a blue state. And that's the difference between me and many other legislators. But, certainly my opponent falls squarely into that category of it's not worth the fight. Don't fight the corruption, profit by it. Profit from the people that are willing to give you, campaign donations, and you'll give them the votes they need, which is how you end up with a really bad voting record. And you'll get something out of it. You'll get a political career. You'll whatever it is that Juneau needs to get you to get your votes. But the one word that I offer that my opponent is not prepared to offer is courage. Courage to confront that. Courage to find a better path than a blue Alaska. 20 years from now, when my children are becoming parents of their own, or at least adults, and I see Michael Bowles in Palmer district next door. He's running against Delana Johnson, and I think he has some courage. It is, I've looked to support legislators, over the years. I've never been able to support a legislator for reelection, just because their voting records have been so terrible, honestly. But it's not for lack of trying, and I certainly hope that if Michael gets elected, or some others like him. I know Barbara Haney is running against Mike Prox in North Pole. I hope she wins. If Barbara or Mike get elected,
Was
I
Shower
hope.
one of, or was Holland one of those guys? I know he wasn't in the
Oh,
House, but he
I
was in the
enjoyed
Senate.
working
But
with Holland. I
yeah,
supported his election against
oh,
Kathy, and
awesome.
um,
So like, hey, we got one right.
right. I mean, hey, but it was he was gone too soon.
Yeah, I
He
know.
was
And
gone
like,
far
man,
too
I
soon.
I worked so hard to help him win against Kathy too, and I also helped Myers beat Coghill up in Fairbanks, and I helped Kaufman beat or win, and I was regret, in some ways, a lot of ways, regret Kaufman being in Juneau. I mean, it could be worse, I guess, but the reality is like he didn't vote the way I anticipated, and I think that's obviously one of your struggles too. So
Sure. Well, I mean,
it.
any of these
Mhm.
guys, I can say, hey, you're way better than Kathy Giesel or John Coghill, which yes, absolutely, yeah. And Myers was a favorite of mine. When he was in, he's not running for reelection, unfortunately. I doubt they'll get somebody better than him, but regardless, you know, when I when I'm able to show that you have hardline Democrats who have literally given thousands of donations to Democrats while serving on the nonpartisan, legislative ethics committee, and Rob and everyone else says, yeah, hey, give him another 4 years on the ethics committee. It's like, what? And I have not, I did not find anyone in the legislature that was willing to vote no um, against some of these folks when the time came and it would have made a difference. Now, when it doesn't matter, yeah, they'll vote no then because that's a free vote for their constituents. But when it actually, would have made a difference, um, no, the courage wasn't there, unfortunately. And so it does go back to courage, whether it's Mike or Barbara or some other candidates out there. I hope that when they get elected, they keep their courage intact. It is difficult to do so. They do not make it easy on legislators to either maintain their conservative bona fides or just courage itself. But if they can do that, absolutely, I'd love to support them and keep them in the legislature and whatnot. But I'll tell you, the time of testing comes after the election. When you're actually in the pit casting the vote. That's when the pressure is intense. That's your fiery furnace. And when someone has been through that and kept their conscience intact, or at least their voting record, which is what I care about most, then that's when you can support someone with confidence. Before somebody's been elected, before they've been tested, it's a crapshoot. We're all listening to the rhetoric.
Yeah,
We're saying,
yeah.
hey, we
I mean,
hope they
that's what.
do good, and we hope they get elected,
Yeah,
and then we find out.
that's why I put, Bronson's meeting was like an hour, and I didn't know Bronson. I don't know him well, and I don't know Josh. I just want to give them an opportunity. Out of the options that are available, they're my choice for
Right.
governor. I did give Bernadette. I want to say this publicly. I did give Bernadette. I reached out to Shower because I also know him publicly, and he was very instrumental in the writing. You also were involved in some crafting through Jerry Ward assistance. There's a couple legislators that were actively involved in helping us craft the language regarding ranked choice voting repeal.
Mm-hmm.
And Shower gave me good advice about removing the campaign finance language from the repeal. Obviously, you can see that was good advice for the new group that's doing the repeal. Is being the No on Two group is running purely dark money advertisements. They're not running anything to do with ranked choice voting. They know it's an unpopular topic. They knew it was an unpopular topic when they ran it in 2019. So Shower's not a dumb guy. He's a smart guy. I mean, and I don't want to take advantage. So I did reach out to him and offer him and Bernadette the same opportunity that I offered Bronson. And I told him I'd be professional, give them a chance to promote their campaign. And Bernadette, as far as I'm aware, has rejected that offer. And so I don't want people to think that I'm being, I am favoritive because I do like